In Orkney, we used to have an expression, "I'll be hour with the moon," meaning that I would come and visit you when the moon is full to light my way. Hello, folks, and welcome to another episode of Hour with the Moon. And I'm joined today for the chat by Rhonda. Mm-hmm. Say something, darling.
Hello. I'm not used to being involved right from the start.
I know, but it's a treat for me as well. And we have got such an amazing episode coming up tonight because we have got two friends of mine who we met for the first time 13 years ago, mm-hmm. I think it was. Two giants of Native American music are Carlos Nakai, welcome RC, mm-hmm. and Will Clipman.
Thanks for having us. Great to be here with you.
Oh,
our
but
pleasure.
It's us that should be thanking you, not the other way around. But it's wonderful to have you here. Now, Carlos, do you want to tell us a little bit about your background and where you came from and how you got into music?
Boy, that could be a long story.
Well, I was thinking that as I was saying it, that's a really bad question, you thought.
Yeah. So stop me if I get carried away. I began my journey, let's say, on this plane of life in a small community next to an extinct volcano, a place called Flagstaff in Arizona. And spent a lot of time listening and being involved in ceremonial activities by all the native people who lived, around that place. And of course, the volcano was regarded as a very sacred thing to many of the tribes in that region. People would come out of the Grand Canyon to visit with elders and other spiritual people in their homeland. People would come out of the Northeast, out of the mesas and other high places in not really mountains, but let's say pieces of what used to be the surface of the planet, and they would come there to visit with their sacred people. And then, of course, there are newcomers like the Athabascans who came out of Alaska and wandered down into that area on their way back to Tierra del Fuego, way down south, to tell all the other people, we found a land of rainbows. Mm. And we want you to come up here. Everything we can think of, all kinds of food, things that we can grow. It was sort of a boon for those people coming off the southern Polynesian archipelago. And so that almost happened in entirety, but the Spaniards and the French came early on. They changed everything, and so many of the people were isolated. And so that's the region that I came from. I came out of, knowing the history of the different tribes, going to their ceremonials that were held throughout the year, many of them based on the moon. So for the astrologers and the astronomers within those tribal communities, the moon and its changes through, let's say, the calendar year. Of course, that changed too when the Gregorian calendar came into play. But they would find times where they would do ceremonies of moving themselves into the future all the time. And so I participated in many of those, being taken by my parents and friends of ours who would say, he needs to go here, he needs to go there, and learn something about being what we are. And so that time was good. And I still carry much of that with me today because people always ask, what people, how do they think? Where are they from? What are they? And so I have to be able to answer that with the knowledge that I gain from elders. There was some book learning that I found readily that there isn't very much done by ethnographers anywhere because they glossed over the actual reality of belonging in a culture, didn't bother with eating, sitting with the people, listening to the storytellers of all the different tribes. And it sort of turned into they live a very primitive life. They live a life that's dependent on scrounging off of the surface of the planet what they could find. And many of the stories were very demeaning to the tribes. And of course, they never told them that, we don't dress up a lot. We spend most of our time in work clothing and we don't do ceremonies all the time. They are relegated for certain events at certain times in our calendar. And much of it, of course, still exists today, but a lot of it is falling away because as I move through time, having all the life experiences that I had, growing into different educational things, being in the military for a while, seeing other people in other cultures, both in the Pacific and up in parts of Asia that I was lucky enough to go to, I was finding more and more that people are not that much different one from the other, from one culture to the other. Language does vary a little bit, but when one learns the languages a little bit, then it becomes very clear that in order to truly understand someone, one has to learn how they organize themselves, what their social system is all about, how they live with themselves in different kinds of environments. And some of them are very isolated, and some of them are rife with all the things that one would need to survive successfully through time. And, it's like intriguing to me. Mm-hmm. So I do that today. And of course, many of the changes that have occurred have also affected me in many different ways. And we can get to that as we go along in this discussion.
Sure, because I would like to bring in Will now as well. And then we'll return back to the music, of course, later, and many other things. But so what's your background, Will?
Well, I was born and raised in Philadelphia, which in the short history of the United States is an old city. And I was born to a mother who played piano and a father who played drums. So I was immersed in rhythm and harmony in utero and through birth into very early childhood. And I can remember the transformative moment when I embarked on this journey as if it were yesterday. My father's drum set and my mother's piano were downstairs in the basement of our family home. And I was 3 years old, and I decided that this morning was the morning I could get down the stairs and get up on the drum throne under my own power. So I did that, picked up a stick, and hit the ride tom of my father's beautiful World War II era Slingerland Radio King drum set. And something about that vibration went through my body and rearranged my molecular structure. And I knew at the age of 3 that I was going to do this forever. I wasn't sure what this was exactly, but I knew I wanted to have that feeling as often as I could for as long as I could. And one thing led to another, and I played my first professional gig at the age of 14. And I made $3.27, which to me was a princely sum. And just the idea that anybody would pay me to play drums was a revelation. So that gave me the notion that this could actually be a career at some point. Well, there was a long and winding road between then and now. But somewhere along that way, it morphed from a passion into a profession. And I've been very fortunate over many, many decades to record close to 100 albums and do scores and scores and scores of concert performances. And another transformational moment was when I met a gentleman named R. Carlos Nakai. And I heard his very first flute recording on cassette. And I had never heard the Native American flute, and this sound, very similarly to my father's drums, went right through me and again rearranged my understanding of being in the world. And I decided I was going to track this guy down and hound him mercilessly until he let me play with him, which I then did. And we kind of hit it off right away, and we've been on this journey together for over 30 years now.
Oh my. I was going to ask you how long you've been performing
Quite a
together.
time, yeah.
And very good friends as well, traveling the world together and with your beautiful wives.
Yeah, so that marriage of the native flute and the drum, and I say drum set, but I really play world percussion. I have an assembly of over 100 instruments from all around the world in the Boom Boom room in Tucson, where I keep my drums. And there's something about that conversation between the flute and the drum that's very ancient and very eloquent and deceptively complex and deep. You would think, oh, a wooden tube with 6 holes in it. Oh, a round hoop of wood covered with animal skin. How interesting could that be? But we've managed to make it fairly interesting. So that's my journey to where we're sitting today.
Yeah, it's amazing as well. I mean, the sound that you do produce, the two of you, is quite incredible. We were treated to that upstairs in our sitting room a couple of nights ago, and it was just fabulous.
That makes me think of something what you just said that URC said to me, because I have a Navajo flute and toy around with it, but you wanted to hear me play it, not because you wanted to hear me perform, but because you said something about it would show you something about my soul, basically. And what you're talking about, the vibrations and everything, it sounds like it's much more than playing notes, playing beats. It's about something that is part of you and comes out of you. And
Well, in time, the journey that we embark on, we are all born into a culture of women. And the female component, of course, are the creators in the culture that I belong to. So we remark all the time upon the importance of my mother, our mothers, our sisters, the female components of cultures that we don't belong to, but it's the mothers in the communities that we regard as quite important because they create life. And even on the planet, all the life forms that are here on the surface of this small piece of dust going around an insignificant star, they're all female. The female deities, that inhabit all the astrology and the astronomical events that occur in that little thin blanket of air that covers us, is like, this is the mother. The earth is our mother. So everything that it creates are for the benefit of all the people who live here. And it will create eternally as long as we use it in a responsible manner. And, being born into my mother's community, I also came by the understanding, in fact, in all the tribes that I inhabit, that you've got to learn how you belong to those people. And so we ask that all the time when we do our performances, whom are you? And one is supposed to remark upon the history of living in a bloodline of others through the mother. And like for me, I belong to people who are called Red Willow people. And my father also is a Red Willow, but he belongs to a different band of people. And those people are called mountain people. And so the environmental understanding always fits into that, but it's always his mother and my mother, and so those two are important. And then, of course, it goes back at least 6 to 12 generations and these grandmothers before my time are all the ones on both sides, and the grandfathers on both sides that are also part of my people. And we say that when you travel on the planet, you should always know this information, because more times than not, you will run into others who belong to the same clanship, let's say. And you will find that they have similar stories that deal with survival and the hardships of living a good life or eking what they can out of making their lives worthwhile for themselves. And you can compare notes about the suffering of humankind through time. And it's like, okay. And like Will was saying, he comes from a community where there are numbers of people from many different tribal communities all over the planet. Here we are in Orkney. Here we are in a community living on an island, like the islands that I go to once in a while, my other home in Hawaii, in Polynesia, and there are clans of people from everywhere. So rather than having animosity towards each other, we go, who are you? Where are you from? Wow. And what's your philosophy? How do you think about being here in our homeland? How do you feel about this and that, and so you build a social world around oneself based on knowledge of others all the time. And so even for me, I've regarded myself as now belonging to the world, because in one community, I may be this, but in another community, the mountain people of my father, they belong and use the grizzly bear, the black bear, and a brown bear as their symbol of this is what our family is organized around, and their philosophy follows that. And so I've run into people who belong to bear clans. Even in the Celtic community, there are bear people, and then there are eagle people. And it's like, how do you know this knowledge that comes from my elders? And you're telling me the same story. and we're separated by 3,000 miles or more of land and water, and the stories are still similar.
Yeah, yeah.
And of course, early ethnologists said, well, similarity of human because we all dispersed out of Africa and this and that. Well, that's too simple.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of it is just like being tourists. We went out there and said, what's behind that hill?
Mm.
And they have different food. Let's go see what they do.
And talk to them and hear their stories.
Yeah. And the curiosity,
Yeah.
is what drives us, I think. So, all of that. And when we came together as musicians, I would ask Will also, have you ever gone and looked at your own cultural heritages? I said, we all belong to more than one cultural heritage. And to understand those and know their philosophies a little bit, I said that inkling of wisdom and knowledge will help you survive into the future successfully.
How did you run with that then, finding your people?
Well, RC and I are both the oldest siblings in our families. And so he's kind of like the older brother I never had. He's introduced me to a lot of myself in the course of our journey. And one really important aspect of that was introducing me to the yoik, which is the traditional song poem of the Sami people, the reindeer people of northern Scandinavia. And he just had this intuition that I should hear this. And he gave me a cassette, again, this primitive technology of an artist named Nils Aslak Valkeapä, who's a Sami of Finnish descent, who's been a mover and shaker in reviving the culture. And again, it was one of those moments, I keep going back to that metaphor, where that vibration just went through me and kind of rewired my synapses in a new way of understanding myself and my way in the world. And I began to pursue that, and I found out that I am descended from Swedish Sami people who emigrated to the United States. And my great-grandfather was a first-generation Sami immigrant named Augustus Nielsen, who I knew as a very young child. And he was kind of a Santa Claus-looking figure, a very large, corpulent man with a great white beard and rosy red cheeks and so on. But that exploration of my connection to that culture has been very deep and rich for me. In fact, it's the reason my one and only solo recording is called Pathfinder. That refers to a figure in the nomadic Sami clans who is the conduit, the shaman, if you will, from the spirit world and interpreting natural information for the people. And interestingly, we touched on this in one of our discussions while we've been together. It had nothing to do with age or gender or lineage. It was just the person who manifested this ability early in life and seemed to be able to speak to the animals and read the weather and so on. And the Pathfinder kept a ceremonial drum for the clan, which was painted with iconography that represented different aspects of Sami life. And the drum is played ceremonially, and little reindeer antler tumblers bounce across the surface and land on certain figures. And it's almost a map of the cosmos. And sometimes it will tell the people where they're supposed to go next. Oh. It's really a matter of survival, not just, sort of new age.
It's not a parlor
woo-woo
game.
Stuff. Yeah. It's right. It's not a parlor game is a great way to put it. It's serious business a lot of the time. But that just kind of blew my mind and made me understand my connection to this lineage of drumming in a much deeper and broader way. So I called my record Pathfinder just to, as an acknowledgement of that. So that's one of the Heinz 57 varieties that I have coursing through my bloodstream, but it's one that I really identify with strongly. And as I said, RC turned me on to that many, many years ago. So
I know.
I owe you one.
Yeah.
I know that the Sami drum was made illegal in the 19th century, I think, in Norway and probably in other areas as well, where they were gathered up and burnt. Is that correct?
That's absolutely correct. There was a time, particularly in Norway, called the burning of the drums, when all the Sami Pathfinder drums they could lay their hands on were confiscated, put in a big pile, and torched. And my distant ancestor, who was also named Augustus Nielsen, was a Pathfinder in his clan, and he hid his drum. There's a great story about where it's hidden and what happened to it, but that's a different story. And he refused to tell them where it was. So rather than burn his drum, they burned him at the stake.
Oh.
And that sounds horrible, but to me, it's really inspiring and uplifting. And it makes me, when I'm complaining about, the plane's late, sound check took too long, the green M&Ms are still in the bowl. I go, wait a minute. There's much more to this than just ego gratification. I'm carrying forward this ancient tradition, and it gives me goosebumps to talk about it, but that really gives my playing, and I'm sure RC's in his way, a depth that I think our audiences respond to.
Right.
We can tell by their reaction before, during, and after the concert that people have been profoundly moved by this, and sometimes in ways they don't understand, but I think that's what it is, just that ancient resonance sort of coming through us as instruments in the form of the music.
I've been to Sweden many times. It's probably the country I've been to the most, and traveled from north to south. And when I was in the north of the country once, I was talking to this guy who was a bit of what we would call a redneck, I suppose. So, to you, a redneck really is as a farmer, as somebody who lives in the country. We have a different connotation.
I know you have a different idea of what it is, and where I came from, it was just my neighbors, farm folk.
But this guy was a bit more right in his politics, I suppose. And he was actually quite offended because he said that the Swedish government, goodness of their heart, had decided to give a homeland to the Sami in the north. And they had sort of like turned around and went, stuff your homeland up your arse. And he went, what? And he was really deeply offended. And they said, we don't respect your borders. We never have. We've followed reindeer from Russia, Finland, Sweden, Norway. We don't recognize your borders as being a real thing. We just go with the reindeer. And he couldn't get that. He was just like, you ungrateful little shit.
Yeah, well, people who are wired into that idea of owning the land and borders and nationalities and so on, which is kind of foreign to my way of being in the world, don't understand that. But that's absolutely true. And the Sami have encountered the same kind of genocide that the Native Americans resisted and still resist to this day in the Americas. So that was another point of connection and resonance, I think, in our journey together, just knowing that we're kind of survivors of this, and we're not romanticizing or representing something that happened hundreds of years ago. We're alive, and we're doing it now, and we're carrying it forward. And that's really both exciting and a kind of a sense of cultural responsibility, if you will.
It's a bit sobering, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, the whole, when I began working with Will, it was immediately, I need to find out who this person is. What does he do? What's his personal philosophy? and how can we work together to produce a sound that will emulate a philosophy that we intend to impress upon others in a manner where they will understand that it's not really the walls that are built between communities and cultures, but it's the sound of the songs and stories that belong to people that gloss over all of that political disparity. And in those songs and stories, especially what Will and I do, are all based on this knowledge of wanting to make a connection. It may be philosophic, it may be, as they say, a principle of becoming more spiritual about one's existence, but singing the songs of humanity itself from our perspective and our knowledge of the hardships of the elders who came before us, who I think now reside in the songs and stories that we do in front of others. And we never impress upon people, you must do this, you must learn that, you must whatever. It's just that, whom are you? How do you belong? And that's it. And then we begin playing again, and they go, how are we supposed to answer that?
Yeah.
We don't know. Your response to what we've asked you is based on what you are able to understand or know that came from people who were here before you. I said, for many Europeans, when you arrived in North America, I said, you found all these different peoples working together, but they were all very distinct one for another. And then people from the continent of Eurasia came, but they were also from many different cultures and perspectives. So there are no one people that came. I said, there are many, and we should all find a way to investigate how we belong to those who were here before us and those who were forced to come to North America for one reason or another. I said, a lot of it is religious. When the Christian churches began moving, they also wanted to impress power. And I said that was entirely off base, because there are people here who belong to many different ways of understanding what life is all about, and we should begin to know that and realize it's not just one perspective that's important, but the agglomeration, let's say, of bringing all these disparate stories together and finding that the core, the essence of it is one story. Mm-hmm. The essence of all of that knowledge and awareness of suffering through time are all very, very similar in all of us as humans of this animal community want to understand how to be in a better place all the time. And the only way that can be reached is by self-awareness. One must go into themselves. And when I inquired of Will, and I said, I think having understood this and talking with other Sami in the 21st or 20th century at that time, there was a young lady. I said, how do you call yourself Sami? I said, American Indians, they'll give you a tribal name. And even when I asked them, but they have no knowledge of what their historic philosophy is all about, that people from other places came and took our land from us by force. And I said, that's not true. There is culture change based on the movement of humans on the surface of the planet. But tell me, what's the philosophy of the people you believe you belong to? Oh, that. We don't do that anymore.
Oh.
Because
Sad.
it's not important to us anymore. And I said, well, how can you say that you belong, but you have no knowledge of how it is to belong historically? I said, that's quite important, because it will show you a path that you can walk that will put you in the center of your own existence. And you can take all the side roads. It's like going off of a highway and say, what's down there? And you go down there and discover something different. You come back to the path and you continue down the road. And we do that all the time in our performances. And it's really very enjoyable to me, because I have to listen to what he's doing. And if he begins by reciting a line of poetry or reciting a story, because he's a writer too, and I'll listen, then I'll go, okay, I need to make a song based on that. And I have to go back into myself too and think about ceremonials I've been to, ceremonials that I grew up in, and go, I think I have a melody line, and I'll play it, and it always works.
Mm-hmm.
So the music that you do is improvised rather
Yes.
than like, here is our greatest hits, you know?
I think it's more than improvisation just for its own sake, but it's like we're investing our knowledge of our life histories together, you know, and he'll never play the same drum. So he has many different drums percussion instruments that he brings with him. And so I have to listen, and many of them are tuned. So I have a set of, of the 12 different minor keys and modes that I work with, and I've got to be able to pick the right sound
To go
that will blend with that percussion. And so it's actually knowledge of our profession too. And it's not just, I learned this at Juilliard. I learned this at Arizona State University in Phoenix. No, it comes from culture. And we just began working together and say, okay, this one in D minor will work with that drum or that percussion instrument. So I have to mark on the paper, okay, if I hear that pitch, then I know what percussion or flute to pick up. Or if I can't figure it out effectively, just start chanting.
Fill it in.
And even the chanting is not based on doing a cultural chant, but it's based on sing something. Doesn't matter. Just sing something.
We had something interesting the other night when you were both here having dinner with us, and you played a little for us afterwards, which was wonderful. And our friend Hjörleifur was here too, from Iceland. And I thought it was really fascinating when it was almost like you were massaging the drum at a certain point. You were rubbing it. And the three of us, me, Tom, and Hjörleifur, all heard different things in that sound. And it was all according to where we were from. I heard thunderstorm. You heard, what did you hear?
I heard gravel on a beach with stormy weather because the waves were coming in fast onto a gravel beach, and the gravel was singing as it goes down. And I also heard the sound of the cry of gulls in the flute as well. I mean, to me, it was the sea.
And Hjörleifur heard a certain kind of snow that gets the crust of ice on it, and then it snows again in kind of pellet form, and then you hear the pellets skittering across the top of the ice.
That's the magic happening when you close your eyes and watch the movie that's playing on the inside of your eyelids and let the sound take you to these places. And I'm always fascinated by where different people go based on what they're bringing to that moment. But I loved your image of massaging the drum. And I started doing that, because there are situations like the other night where, RC has one flute and I have one drum,
Right.
which is not our customary, broader palette of sounds available. And you start being creative about how to get different sounds out of that membrane, with your fingernails, the tips of your fingers, the palm of your hand, your fingertips as mallets, the rawhide beater, changing the pitch by pressing against the back of the head and tightening it, and just all sorts of things to introduce variety, tonal variety into the sound. But I loved that feedback that you gave us, and that's just really, really wonderful, because I think we're, as RC has said in so many words, we're inviting you to tell us your story. It's not a dictation of this is this and that is that. It's an invitation to interact with the sound in your way. Yeah. So that was really, really lovely.
Yeah.
You remind me of when you were speaking before about the way that the instruments were resonating with you and bringing things up inside of you and everything. It made me think of Shapeshifter. And you have a real interest in mythology too. You must be every bit as much of an anthropologist as RC is, as you're kind of making connections with people all over the world. And
yeah, I'm not gonna own being as much of a cultural anthropologist as our Carlos Nakai, but I am kind of an amateur student of those things. In terms of myths and masks and that whole tradition and mythology and folklore. And I've been studying that informally for half my life or more. But yeah, I think we both are, because we perform and educate in so many different settings that you really have to take a moment and kind of vibe out what's right for that audience, for that group of people, for that moment. And then you become that and kind of become the instrument and let the song or the story just come through you with as little interference from ego and intellect as one can manage, and just kind of show up and be fully present and get out of the way, and let it happen. We actually have a song called Shapeshifter on one of our albums that kind of takes people there in a different way. But
that one, Shapeshifter, is a good one. That one is based, from my perspective, on using particular flutes, whistles, and voice and rattles to make an image in the listener of a person in a shamanic cultural tradition where there's, again, a percussionist who does essentially what Will was remarking on, will take that piece of leather stretched onto a bone, a horn, whatever, and will make sounds that will encourage their patient. You listen very carefully to what I'm doing, and I'm going to intone this song too. And they will tell, like a psychologist, I'm going to remind you of the oldest story of Ardvaig coming and doing this and bringing fire. But with fire came knowledge. And they will start and they will do all of this and they will dance around and get dressed up. Of course, I can't do that on stage, or neither can Will. However, we work at it. I have a dance that I do called the Wallaby Dance, but I'm always wishing I could disrobe entirely like they do in Australia. And native people who showed me that dance are totally nude. They paint themselves white with this clay that they find in the ravines, and then they put little feathers all over their all over their bodies, and they dance like the little wallabies, out there. So how do we create that image and not approach it in a scientific way, like some people say, well, yeah, an anthropologist is, but actually an anthropologist is a listener who remarks on things and say, this influenced me in this way. And I'm now going to make this story a part of my own awareness of this is what I learned from others. See, but an anthropologist, as they remark on it today, is like, no, you study other people's plagiarism over years, and then you remark on something that has no bearing on, I saw this person do this. Mm-hmm. I heard this noise coming from this person doing this. I was in the environment this person was in, and I felt the air, and I felt the other people around me. I smelled the smoke of the fire. Yeah.
Yeah.
We do the best we can, and we do shapeshifter, and it's just like, and people will sit there, and I can see, as he says, they close their eyes and they're dreaming. Young people especially do the best at it, and they'll be moving with us, and, and they'll be smiling, and, so, but their spirit is so new, according to my cultures, my tribal communities, that they still know where the essence of all life comes from. They still know how they were once an important spiritual being who knew everything. And now they came here to experiment, but they didn't learn it out of any book or anything. They know it already, and they go back into their dream, and they'll come up and talk to one of us and say, I really like that song. I really like that. How can I find one of these drums or one of these rattles? And go, okay, we've got them.
Yeah.
And we hope they keep doing this into the future, because we're also trying to encourage younger people to, you have cultures, you can do what we're doing. And if you need financial support, do this. Reveal to other people how you belong to them too, and how this is what I learned from elders in my communities, all of them, as many of them as I could find, and now I do this. And I'm glad you came to my show, because I represent myself, but I belong to all these people. So now they're telling the stories, and they're giving their knowledge and wisdom, and it's like, we've done our job.
Yeah. Oh, that's wonderful. You do a lot of work with young people, don't you, Will? With the masks. I was fascinated about the mask thing. Could you?
Yeah, I'm not doing a whole lot of that right now, but for 40 years or so, I did hundreds and hundreds of artist in residency programs with schools and also in prisons and hospitals and senior centers and retreat centers, kind of anywhere people would bring me to put on my little dog and pony show. But the essence of that is having the kids make their own masks according to the technique that I've developed, working with each other in teams of two. And then the mask, when it's hardened, is painted and embellished with 3D objects. And parallel to that, we write what I call the mythic persona poem, which is kind of the life story in the first person of the mythic being that you want your mask to represent. And the whole thing, that might be 10 or 20 days working with the same group of kids every day. And that culminates with a presentation to the community where kids who want to and can perform, put their mask on and perform their mythic persona poem. And that's a profound influence on the community. I mean, parents and teachers and administrators who think they know these kids and know what they're capable of are just brought to their knees, as I am, by what these people, little people, are capable of. We underestimate them. You know? I mean, I'm talking about 3rd, 4th, 5th graders who are just mastering language and have enough manual dexterity to do this. And they're just so ripe for that moment. And the poems they write and the masks they create are vastly superior to my own. So again, it's that idea of learning from them more than they're learning from me, I think. I just kind of toss the pebble in the pond and let it ripple out. And once that starts happening, you just keep saying yes. There's always that fear of being wrong or am I doing this right? Can I do this? May I do this? So it's a lot of, yes, you can.
Yes.
Give it a try and we'll see where it goes, you know.
Over the years, I've done a lot of work at schools here, you know. Well, I could say work. It's not work. Going in and telling stories to the kids, traditional tales from here. And then on more than one occasion, I've had a phone call from a teacher that says, can you come into such a school? And I say, yeah, sure. It's done through the museum. It's done through work. But, I mean, I do it in my own time as well, actually. But the number of times I've had teachers saying, I must warn you about, and I stopped them there. And I said, look, whatever kid you're going to warn me about is probably going to get more from this than all the others.
Right.
And it's always the case. They say, my God, I've never seen them sitting so quiet. Because speaking to each other, that communication is different from a blackboard and a book, you know. And probably the kid is frustrated because maybe like myself, dyslexic, not able to kind of fit in with the learning system. But when they hear spoken words, it's much more to them, and then they do get a lot more. I had one boy stopped me once when I was on my way out, and he goes, can you tell me one more story? So I told him a really, really short story. And he felt that he'd kind of got that extra thing, you know, the cherry on the cake, you know. And so, yeah.
Yeah, I've had that identical experience scores of times. You know, this kid here is going to give you, and I said, tell me what he's going to give me. You know, let me give him a little something and we'll see what he gives all his. You know, there's always that one who just has never done well in the formal setting, who just blooms with this new creative opportunity. Yeah. And it's such an affirmation. I mean, the parents often don't even know that aspect of their own child. And I don't interfere in that relationship, but I always get a smile out of parents who come up to me and say, God, you never knew Johnny or Susie could do anything like this. And I said, well, now you know.
Yeah.
Carry on.
Yeah.
Should we have a little bit of music?
I would love a little
because
bit of music.
I was kind of thinking, should we do it all at the end and then can edit things into it? Or I think it's much more natural just to go with.
Let's do it if you guys are.
If you guys would be up for playing.
And do you have a pause button?
Yes.
We do.
Let's pause and we'll get
you can have
a drum and a flute of the flute, just the vibration of it. And I'll select a particular instrument, whether it be clay or metal or wood or whatever material that I intuitively feel will resonate with that flute or his voice. And I'm not so much playing a rhythm as playing an obligato, a melody that it must be played with his melody. So we're both keeping time. I mean, we both always know where the one is, but it's not like playing a beat and he's playing along with that beat. It's really me. It's kind of like a conversation. So there's that aspect of our interaction that's really interesting to me as a drummer, to just, okay, don't worry about playing a beat. Just play music, have a conversation.
Yeah.
So if we're doing a performance, you'll hear that.
Hi, this is Rhonda. Tom and I want to say thank you for listening and to let you know that we have a website too, Orkneyology.com. Also a YouTube channel and an independent press, Orkneyology Press. We've got some exciting plans for the future. If you enjoy what we're doing, the best way you can help us to grow is to leave us a review and a like wherever you listen and tell your friends. And if you're so inclined, you can buy us a dram on Ko-fi. That's Ko-fi. Just search for Ko-fi/Orkneyology. Thanks so much. Enjoy.
Wonderful.
Amazing.
You've got Rhonda entranced.
So where did you go with that one, Rhonda?
I was running around a forest in a cute leather dress.
You could rock a cute leather dress, I'm sure.
Oh, thank you both so much. That was just amazing.
Oh, thank you. Well, it's no fun to do this by ourselves in an empty room. So, well, it is. Sometimes we do that and it is kind of fun, but it's really important for it to be a story and to have someone hear the story and then respond with their version of it.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening.
Yeah, we do like this performance, very short, but it has a long intro. And it's our homage to being in Hawaii on the Big Island, on the west side in Powhatan. And the turtles live there. The sharks, they live there, the white tips. And they're regarded as sacred people. So, they don't go out and just kill people. They swim with us too. And Will loves to swim at least a mile around point. I go, where'd he go? I don't know. He went around the corner. Oh my God. It's real dangerous because the water current comes in and it slams the water against the lava that's down in the flow there. Young people have jumped off in that region and get sucked into the caves, and then I don't know. Well, he went down. He never came up. He's down over there underneath the ground, and they'll find him a few months later, but so it's very dangerous, but it's very romantic at the same time. There are many songs about it. And so we do this piece because we both do a prayer when we go there for the last cultural community that was there, of native people, native Hawaiians, and they had a king and a queen, and they held out to the very last because they didn't want to join, the new community that was moving in, the sugar barons, the people who imported all kinds of things, and all the other Asians who came, from the West and the South to live in that small place. And so they held out as long as they could. And the army that was backed by the American army at that time lined up in their uniforms after coming off a sailing ship in a landing there that the Hawaiians used in the old days for fishing. And the traditional people were on a ridge overlooking that whole area where they used to live in the old days. And the men came down and said, all the women will stay here and defend the house and the children and all of that. And of course, the house was the land. Oh. And the men came down and they charged, everyone goes barefooted. And so they charge across this lava called it's very sharp and in little particles. And they say they bloodied their feet and everything, charging across. All they had were little shields that were like shields with the Sami and other cultures that represented the family crest. And then all they had were a stick, kind of a knotted stick. And they charged across, and of course the army had muskets and other firearm, and they killed all of them. And then the second wave came, and they did the same, and that is regarded as the end of the traditional Hawaiian community. And so the women were up there and they were all aghast. What do we do now? Well, the wife of the leader, the king, she came down and she said, we will all dress in the men's clothing and we will charge.
Oh.
And they charged too. And on top of the bodies of their husbands, brothers, and friends, they were all shot down too.
Oh.
And so they say at the end, no one knows where the bodies of the king and queen are today. It said they were picked up by the local medicine people, and they were taken away. But even in the modern world, no one knows where they were buried. And so we go out there to honor that in the charge of the last cultural people, because in all cultures on the planet, which I've studied about and interviewed people from Aotearoa to Rapa Nui to, all over, that this happened because of changes in community and what we call colonialism. Mm-hmm. It was bad at the time, but it's not all bad all the time because there are certain advantages that came because of that. And we do a prayer, and take the flower leis, and put it on this altar that the traditionals built. And we call them heya, or little sacred, like a church, like an altar in St. Magnus. Mm-hmm. And that altar sits out there on top of that lava. Mm-hmm. And so we do this song based on our impressions of having been there numerous times and done this, and honoring them wherever we are on the planet. So we did that here in your space. It's the same honoring. But it could be an honoring for your own peoples too. Mm-hmm. And how the culture has changed over time.
Go ahead, Juan.
Just that story reminds me of a Scottish event, which was the Battle of Culloden, which was regarded as the end of the traditional Highland culture, and it was the same thing. Highlanders with their claymores, charging chaotically across the moor and being mowed down by musket fire and cannon fire. Mm-hmm. I've been there as well as to the site that R.C. mentioned, and I felt the same energy in both places, which on one hand is very dark and heavy and sad, but on the other hand is, that blood in the soil kind of regenerates, a new cultural awareness. So we still have the music and the dance and the traditions and the chants and the prayers and the relationships with nature. Those are unkillable. And so we celebrate that, and the light, somehow the light balances the darkness. But
yeah,
that song always makes me sad, almost heartbreakingly sad, but at the same time, it's also very uplifting.
Yeah.
We get Hawaiians who come to us to, how do you know these songs? I had the Lord's Prayer translated into a Hawaiian chant.
Really?
And so I'll read that as he's playing, and get back on the flute and play the flute as they would on a nose flute. And they go, God, that was so moving. And do you know the story? I said, that's why we do it. Mm-hmm. It's for you and everyone in the audience who came to America out of political and religious and social strife, and the diversity of all of us. We're all people who are surviving this great suffering.
Mm-hmm. That's
I understand.
Is that what you were doing yesterday at Rackwick when you were singing to the sea?
I had to, because you have to pray to the water, And so I said, I let Pam know I have to go down there on the beach because I had to pick the ocean up, put it on there. But I couldn't get down. It was very rocky, and I said, I can take a chance. The water may pick me up. I said, we'll take you home instead. So
yes, especially in a place called Wreckage Bay.
Yeah. And it reminded me of being a Rapa Nui and seeing all those, the Moai standing there looking in, going, yeah. So, there are a lot of references like that. So when we play, and because we've researched ourselves and we've come to this awareness as musicians, we play that awareness. And it's always amazing how it affects people. And young people here can do that too.
Yes, young people. All you young people listening to this podcast, we're talking to you.
I'm not sure we've got any young people listening to the podcast.
We don't know who's listening. Maybe those young people.
At my age, young is a relative term.
That's right.
Yeah. Anybody under
a lot of
50
people are younger.
or 60.
Kids.
Uh-huh.
I feel a refreshing idea from both of you about the freedom to play music, to enjoy music and not have to think about this is how you do it. Is this right? Is this wrong?
No.
That's the way my mindset has always been, and it makes me very anxious about how I sound, But that's for how do I sound to someone else. But yours is coming up out of you, and it just is what it is.
Well,
I'm inspired by that.
Yeah, I used to play brass instruments. I was majoring in music and hoping to play in the United States National Orchestra. Well, I suffered a traffic accident, destroyed my embouchure, and a person in the military said, "You're getting out now, but you will get a letter when your space comes." But instead, he said, you're going to have to wait until 28 trumpeters die before the space will be available to you. He said, how long will that take? You don't know.
How old are they?
Yeah. He said, find something else to do. And then because of the accident, I found these. And Pamela, my best friend, she was learning flute, and I found her flute book, and I found I have a system now that is based on flute music. Yeah, and I use that all the time now to think about. So I still compose in my mind as I would in a Western European discipline, but now I improvise and know how the melody lines go. Yeah.
You can use both.
So, yeah. And then once in a while I'll just, if I hear what he's doing and I go, I thought the sound of that beat, I'll just start chanting. So even in the chanting, I'll make something up because to evolve a melody with the voice is another power. And medicine people do that all the time. They evoke the human voice. And I've learned from elders, there's a particular pitch tuning that should come from around your lungs, around the rib cage, not from your throat, but down here. And that sound comes out, and it'll heal people. I say, well, I don't want to be a healer, but it might be interesting to see how it moves people.
Yeah.
So we do that all the time. And he'll play like these giant drums from the Taos Pueblos in New Mexico, but we don't use them all the time because they're very large. They have a particular kind of sound. So there are certain places that we figure, I think the Taos drums would work here.
Wow.
We went to the Dwarfies staying yesterday because we went over to Hoy for the day. And, Will, you were in there with your drum as well, because I did say that there was a certain resonance within that structure. I mean, we could call it a tomb, but it's assumed to be a tomb, but we don't actually know what it is.
Mm-hmm.
How did you find that?
It was like being inside the drum. It was a I was completely enveloped in the vibration. And as you know, it's a very small space, but the stone is very resonant. So it was really loud and really, my whole body was kind of vibrating. And when I stopped, the sound continued to reverberate for 3 or 4 seconds, probably longer, but that was as long as my ear could hear it. And in such a small space, I was amazed that it had a cathedral-like volume to it. So that was my experience of it.
I should probably just mention for anybody that doesn't know what the Dwarfy Stain is.
Oh, right.
It's a large block of rock in the valley that has been hollowed out in Neolithic times, we think. So, I mean, using stone to cut into stone. And so it's a doorway with 2 chambers on either side with a sill, which is just cut from the rock. And there is a stone outside that would have been used to plug the doorway. But it's a remarkable thing, the only rock-cut tomb in Britain. But like I said, we don't actually know whether it was made as a tomb. It's similar to one style of tomb, a Buchan-style tomb in Orkney. But that's not to say that it was. It's a lot of work. Whatever it was, it was a hell of a lot of work.
Yeah.
But it is quite a special place.
What a treat to be in there. Yeah.
And full of stories, that valley too. And that makes me think about you and your storytelling, because one of the reasons that you both met Tom to begin with was to talk about stories. You were wanting to talk about shapeshifters, I think, at that time.
Sulky folk.
Is there something, a story that you would like to share with us?
Sure. This is a story about how it's a Sami story about how that migration from the traditional homeland to North America took place. The Sami have great reverence for the raven, even more so than the eagle, because of its intelligence and its ability to use language and tools. And it's said that during the burning time of the drums, a raven came and took a pebble from the cairn that was built over one of the last Pathfinder drums to mark where it was, but also to conceal it. Flew off to the west, and it never came back. So the people waited for a while and were growing a little bit anxious about that, and then another raven came and kind of poked around the same cairn, took another pebble, flew off into the west. They waited and waited and waited, and it never came back. Well, a third raven came and poked around the same cairn and picked out another pebble, flew off with it into the west, never came back. Well, this happened a 4th time and a 5th time. And when the 5th raven took the stone and flew off, it flew directly into the sun. And they say that's why the raven is black. It got charred by flying too close to the sun. But eventually the people said, well, these birds are not coming back. We need to go in that direction and see what happened to these pebbles, because the Pathfinder drum tells us where we're supposed to go. So they left the drum buried under the cairn, and they set out to this place, just kind of following their dreams. They didn't really know what was on the other side of this great expanse of water. But they did eventually arrive in what we now call North America, and they migrated to a place that felt like home to them. And in that place, there were 5 what seemed like oceans, huge bodies of water, almost like the fingers of a hand. And those are the Great Lakes. And that's where a lot of Sami people settled in the upper Midwest of what's now America. And they realized that the ravens who had never come back, each of them dropped a pebble, and that where the pebble landed became one of the Great Lakes, and that marked where they should settle.
Oh, wow.
So that's a good one.
That's beautiful. I'd never heard that before.
Yeah, and then there's another story of this farmer working his field in Iowa, south of Lake Superior, is it? Yeah. And he found this huge stone, big long stone, and he didn't know what it was, but he thought he could use it as either a fence post or part of his house. And he dug it up, and it was covered in runes.
Oh.
And the runes talked about these Vikings and others who came to that region, and they established themselves here.
Mm.
And it just fits into his Sami story.
Yeah.
But the ethnologists in the U.S. say it's not true. That farmer made it up. He said, how could he know runes that are very old and know the story? He said the runic language changes all the time, and he might have made it up because there are words on there that, or phrases, let's say, that don't match up with anything that's done today runically.
Right.
And I said, people did this.
Yes.
Did it in their time. And there's no way you could question it.
Yeah.
But they insist that it was all made up. The farmer buried it himself. And he said, I want no money. I want nothing, but I want the knowledge of how this stone got into my field.
Yeah. Sometimes people just can't see something because they've already decided what it is or isn't. They already know, so they don't need to know anything else.
Mm-hmm.
One thing I love about a lot of Indigenous stories that I'm aware of is that they're not linear narratives with a beginning, a middle, and an end that we think of in terms of Eurocentric literature. And I'm sure Tom has found this to be the case in many of the stories he tells. They just are what they are, and you get out of it what you get out of it. But I think that expectation that it's going to have a prologue, chapters, a denouement, and a nice tidy conclusion, you're going to be unsatisfied if you have that preconception because you're not open to, the pebble in the pond kind of effect, which is concentric and continues to ripple out.
You're a poet too, and poetry for me, what I learned in school was all this meter and rhyme and iambiatic and things that I just couldn't think that way. And so to myself, I always thought I don't like poetry because what I was seeing in it wasn't what they were telling me I was supposed to be getting out of it. And so I thought, well, I can't do it. I do it wrong. And it wasn't until I was an adult that I realized I can take out of it whatever I want to. So
and that whole notion of rules and doing it right and wrong is something that I try to disarm immediately in my workshops. I start by asking leading questions like, does a poem have to rhyme? And surprisingly, a lot of kids know that it doesn't. And I said, that's exactly right. Some people rhyme all the time. They can't say what they say any other way. You might be a poet and you don't even know it, but it doesn't have to rhyme. Yours might, and that's great. It might not, and that's great too. But, and just disarming some of the, proscriptions against trying it.
All bound up,
right?
Not able to just.
And if you just blow those away and start with a tabula rasa, then it's an invitation to do your own thing with it, which is really liberating.
Yeah, some of us take longer than others to learn that, but Better
No,
late
it's
than never,
not your
right?
fault. It happens to the best of us.
Yeah, the same thing happens with musicians. I mean, I'll get my partner and I, the man who invented these instruments, will get, let's say, well-trained performers. In other words, they know the system of Western European, the discipline of music, and why keys and the piano was invented from 325 keys down to 88, and why we use that now as the basis of composition. But they say, why don't you play with us? And I think this evening we're going to see a cellist, and I want to ask her, can you improvise?
Mm.
There are some soloists who plays with the Philadelphia Orchestra. He can improvise anything. And I wish Yo-Yo Ma could do that. And I'd play with him too. But they have a problem. There's a rule.
Mm-hmm.
And they say you cannot fake music. And that's all you're doing is you're faking music. And I said, what does that mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've heard of folk music, but
yeah.
fake music is a new one on me.
I said, you mean I'm stymied for a word? And he goes, no, it's just that you have no training and you have no knowledge of the rules of composition, and you have to read what's been written because that is qualifiable as music. And it's like poetry.
Mm.
If you can't do stanzas in a certain form, and put them together, then you're not really doing anything. What about folk music? Oh, that's primitive.
That
Anyone can do that. And I say, no. Okay, I'll play a pitch in A minor, and you take your instrument, whatever it might be, and you play around me. Make a melody based on that scale. What do you want me to do?
Oh.
You don't know. So, okay, here, play from your soul, play from a dream space in your mind, and listen to what I'm doing, and you play around me. So children do this all the time. They'll sit down on a street corner or out in the woods, and then they'll just begin intoning a sound. And they say, what are you doing? Oh, I'm singing with that bird. Do you hear that bird up there? God. This child is going to be ruined later in life. Because they have to learn the right way to sing.
Yeah,
So here's a key of C, and I want you to go and play the F sharp. And here's your bass line. And there you go. Don't learn that. You can learn the piano, but learn to just make songs too.
Yeah.
So it's a difficult world out there for real musicians.
I remember an old friend of mine, Billy Jolly, who was a fantastic musician. He played harmonica, and he sang. And if there was a folk session, he was there, And he met up with a guy that was here for the St. Magnus Festival, so big classical music festival. And this guy was like a sort of world-renowned violin player. And he said, well, we're having a session tonight, come by, the pub and join in. Have a bit of fun. And he said, well, I can't do that. it has to be written down or I can't. And he went, just follow what we're doing. And he said, can't do that because it's not written down. So, it's, I've seen fiddle players just watching the fingering, of the person they're sitting next to. They don't know the tune, but they watch the fingering and then they start to play and they join in. And I mean, that's talent.
Well, that discipline, I think, is wonderful. It's not that one shouldn't have that or can't be a great musician with that knowledge and skill. I love people who can do all of it, like the cellist he mentioned, Ute Bar David, like R.C. himself, who's a classically trained musician and can sight read anything you put in front of him, but he can also just play from the heart in the moment with no, nothing more than a key, and, people who have all that knowledge and can do that are few and far between and really, really special, talents. But yeah, we've encountered classical players who are just like deer in the headlights. They just cannot play it without the sheet music. And that, to me, that's debilitating. You should be able to do either or all of it or none of it, and so much world music, which is really my interest and specialty, has never been written in any kind of notation. It's handed down, through oral tradition and elders teaching young people and, just having a passion for it and picking up the instrument and figuring out what sounds it makes and then making your own songs. And, that's, in the Eurocentric tradition, we've had 740 years of having 12 notes to work with, which is not a lot of notes when you think about it. Quincy Jones has a great book called 12 Notes. And it's like, isn't it amazing? There's only 12 of them, and think of all this amazing music. That took creativity to, take those 12 tones and do what we've done with them. But there's also, in African music and Arabic music and music from Southeast Asia, there's microtonal intervals that are not writable in the Western scale. Is that not music? I would argue that it is, so it's a broader, I think our conception of it is just broader and more inclusive, and includes all of that.
Yeah. I hear some of those extra notes too when you play your flute, because it doesn't just stick on a note. It wanders in and out of it and up and down, and I like that.
Well, a lot of that comes from my brass technique, because the trumpet, any brass instrument that's valve, you're locked into, you've got to play here. And it's very difficult to do what they call pitch bending. And I found these little flutes, and I go, my, I can pitch bend, I can triple tongue, can do all this other stuff that I couldn't do on the brass. And so I love this instrument because it gave me another facility. And a musicologist will come and say, you should really learn to play in pitch. And I go, oh, I do. But I
do
like
that.
doing this too.
Yeah.
And even concert flute players come and they go, how can I do that? I said, oh, it's real easy. Do this, do that. And they go, oh yeah. They tell us we're not supposed to do that. And I said, no. There are no rules when you're doing your own sound.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Having attended a number of and accompanied him at a number of his flute convocations, I've heard him say many times to people who want to do what he does and play like him, no, just pick up your flute and play your song, your sound. That's where you want to go with this. This other stuff is technique, but that's not going to get you to telling your story in this way,
That's something that I've never even considered, because I don't play an instrument. But
your voice is an instrument. You have a beautiful voice for what
that's
you
because
do.
I've got a cold.
I like that gravelly. I like that husky, gravelly thing you get.
It sounds like that anyway.
Not always. Depends on the consumption of whiskey the night before, usually. But, we've got to tell the story about our Carlos.
Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Rhonda said one day, we're upstairs, she goes, put some music on. I said, yeah, stick on whatever you want. And she said, well, you should I'll put on something you like. And I went, you won't like what I like. So just, put on anything. And she says, well, you won't know this person, but this is our Carlos Nakai, and she was playing this music. And I went, who's that again? And she said, it's our Carlos Nakai. And Rhonda and her mum had a wee shop in South Dayton in Western New York, and used to sell your CDs.
And play them.
Mm-hmm. So was a fan. And so I said, oh, yeah, I know him. And she said, no, you don't. And I said, yeah. She goes, how do you know him? I said, well, I met him at the museum. What was he doing at the museum? I said, he was coming to see me.
You said like that too.
And so proof.
Yes. Well, I believed you because it did sound, you said they had come to talk to you about stories. That sounds reasonable.
It was about Selkie folk.
But then you dug out our Carlos's email at work one time, and you sent him an email and said, my wife doesn't believe me. So then you wrote back, double proof. And here you sit.
Yeah. And it's such a pleasure to have you here. I wonder if we could get another little bit of music before we wrap this up for this episode, because we've taken up so much of your time. And I really, really appreciate it.
This is what we do. This is who we are. So it's everything that ever happened or ever will happen is happening right now.
Mm-hmm.
So it's good times.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good time to come together, too, because when we first came here, it was to listen to what he was doing and listen very carefully and say, how does he do these stories and these tales? And I was more interested in being able to relate my culture and its way of telling stories into a manner that includes what he does too. And then there's Will and the way he recites stuff too. And Pam says, you need to do what he does. I said, no, I don't. But you learn from him, but I need to do my own thing.
That's right. Yeah.
So it was that. And here we are now.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I feel it's an honor, a great honor to meet another elder like us, who is doing something about culture and about this exists. And it's mainly in your mind, but it's in the reality. Walk the streets, you see. Yeah. And I hope, like Will said, yes, as for young people, I hope there are some listening who will say, I want to do that too. And there are no rules. There's no school. You just start. Because we have the knowledge of history. It's in us.
Yeah.
And you just start. My grandma told me this story, and you go.
Yeah. No, I always love passing on stories to kids and encouraging them to tell them as well.
Mm-hmm.
And hopefully they do and continue to do so. Friend of mine once told me that he was going down the street and he heard a wee boy talking to his mum, and he said, I saw Tom Muir walking down the street the other day, just like a real person. Make of that what you will.
Putting one foot in front of the other. It was remarkable.
You want me to start?
I want you to start this one, please.
All right.
Oh, fabulous.
Thank you.
If we had our equipment with us and I had all of the things that I use to emulate the sound of being, out in the woods or in a canyon or something nearby, and I could put that and we have all of this going. We could really make people dream.
Mm-hmm.
So it's making use of what exists right now.
Mm.
I mean, there were some rock and roll festivals going on, but there must be a guitarist or a bass player who can also dream with that instrument.
Mm-hmm.
Because our bass player, if he were with us, he would be doing those dream sounds too and making that instrument, sound not like it's supposed to with the band, but I do this too.
Mm-hmm.
And I make these sounds.
Well, that brought me back to my childhood because it was like rain on the roof. And also the cries of the birds on the moorland. But I'm very much land and sea, I'm very rooted to where I was born, because it was on a small farm, but it was by the side of the sea. And so I spent my whole childhood feral, running around, on the land or on the sea, and just really sort of loving the nature of the place, being fascinated by it, going looking for birds' nests so I could marvel over the beauty of the eggs, and then you would have them, they would hatch out and they'd be all fluffy and beautiful, and then they'd run off, and but that's what that brought me back to. So that's
sounds like our sauna experiences. We were, where were we? Anyway, I found a sauna, and I said, how do you make one of these? I said, oh, you make an outhouse, and then you insulate it, but you make sure the roof is flat and low. I think I want one. So I built one, or I had one built for me. That's lined with cedar wood in Colorado, way up high where we're at. And we go there. There's just two of us, sitting all naked in there, looking at each other and going, I think needs more water. Needs more water. He's not saying anything.
He's not screaming yet.
I said, it's getting hot. I said, well, I need to stop there. But, it's that experience of being totally on your own with yourself in an environmental space. And then when we go to Hawaii, the same thing. Just stay by the beach, go into the water,
Yeah.
The very first time we went to the Big Island together, R.C. had been there before, but he knew where these steam vents were, where the steam from the volcanic activity was coming up through crevices in the rock, and you climb down in and just sit in this really intense steam that's like the planet cooling itself. And, oh, man, wow.
Take your paper box with you to sit on.
Yeah.
I was once in a sweat lodge in Evie, of all places, just on the north coast here in Orkney. That was done by a group of Cree First Nation people who were here, who had Orkney ancestors, because 3/4 of the Hudson Bay Company came from Orkney. They signed on here in Stromness, and then they sailed off to America. They took native women as wives. Some of them abandoned them and came home. Other ones remained and stayed with them. And so there is a lot of Orkney surnames among First Nation people out there, like Fluted, Icebester, Linklater. And my own family as well, Dravers in Westry. There was Chief Draver. There was the Draver fella married the daughter of a Cree chief, and their son, the chief grandson, became Chief Draver. I was actually reading a little thing recently. There was a little history written about them for a school project by a school kid from Westry, and they said that the Chief Draver, his daughter in World War II, was serving, and she went into a cafe in Toronto and ordered a coffee, and they refused to serve her because she was First Nation. And that was illegal at the time. So she sued them successfully. And I thought, you don't mess with Westry women. My mother was a Westry woman. You do not mess with them.
I've heard that more than once.
You were saying about, the respect for women earlier. I remember my mother once saying that, like my father was the head of the household, and we laughed and laughed. But being in that sweat lodge, I had I had met up with a lot of them, and I said, right, the next day I'll put on a pot of coffee, because they were complaining that the coffee was terrible. I said, I'll put on a pot of coffee, and they were going to be dancing in the gardens at the museum. I said, we'll leave the back door open, pot of coffee, I'll get some biscuits, some cookies, help yourself, you know. If you need a break, if you're fed up with people coming up asking about your dress or whatever, just come and have a cup. So I got invited to participate in the sweat lodge, which they had created, and they were using water from the freshwater burn and also from the sea. So it was the mixture of the two. And that was like 3 sessions. And the last one, I thought my eyes was going to melt. You know, it was like you almost got into a slightly panicky stage of, you know, I can't breathe. You know, it's so hot. And was the drumming in there as well, and burning sweet herbs on the fire. But it was a really amazing experience, and not something that I was really expecting. I was expecting just to go along, say hello, and then leave again. But they went, no, you have to come in with us. I remember the one guy saying, you got to pray. And not being a religious person, I generally don't pray because, you know, I don't. And so he was saying, there's somebody down that end not praying. And I thought, well, I'm sort of trying my best, you know. And so then the second time, I was just wishing happiness for people in my life that I loved. And then he said, boy, you sure were praying that time. How does he wandering about in my head? You know, it was some experience, though.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Well, thank you both so much for spending this time with us. I'm so honored, and it's been such a thrill meeting you both.
Oh, thank you. It's been my pleasure and honor and
yeah. This is very fortunate. And the curiosity, I think, for all of what we've experienced here in your homeland was very fortunate for us. I've enjoyed it immensely.
Well,
but I enjoy going to islands, you know, because I watch the people that live on islands. And they're very different from mainlanders.
Well, it's an absolute honor to have you here in Orkney, and it's such a pleasure to have you here with us in our home. And I hope that there are many, many more meetings in the future.
We'll see.
May it be so.
Yeah.
Thank you. Good night.